Hi, welcome. This is HiFi Hull, the HiFi podcast that prioritizes your listening pleasure. In this episode, I will be discussing my HiFi journey, how and why I got into HiFi, what I learned, mistakes that I've made, and where I'm going next. I'm hoping this helps encourage others, and I'm hoping this helps some people avoid making my mistakes. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or opinions related to the topic or related to hi-fi or music in general, then I'm more than keen to hear them. You can drop the podcast a note via email hifi-hull@biscuit.ninja or via Blue Sky. Mention or DM hifi-hull.bsky.social. Before we get into the subject matter, we have our standing agenda items. Try and keep this brief today. First up is the album recommendation for this episode. This time I'm going with 2020's Febedrom by Gopa. I have probably completely mispronounced that. There will be a link to the band's website in the show notes. Gopa or Gaupa are a rock band from Falun, Sweden. They are, I think they describe themselves as prog rock or progressive rock. And the album features some striking guitar chords and riffs, heavy set bass guitar, pronounced drumming, and it makes for an almost heavy metal sound, which is beautifully and eloquently offset by Emma Naslund's lush vocals even. My apologies, the pronunciation gets me. It's something that I stumbled upon a day or so ago, and I've listened to it a couple of times through, and I've really enjoyed it. It's got some lovely dynamics. It really draws a creative musical landscape. It is one for a proper listening session rather than background music. It's definitely worth giving up some of your precious time for a listen. It's possibly not an album to listen to you at any time you're susceptible to a headache, though. In the new music to me section, the postman has had a week off, or at least a few days off. There's been no new deliveries of albums or recordings on physical media since the last episode. And very briefly on hi-fi and gear updates, Stereo Phil of Cheshire Audio fame has published a retro review of the Riga Myra amplifier, actually the very one that I own. If you search Cheshire Audio on YouTube, it's currently his most recent video, and there is of course a link also in the show notes. And with that, in record time, we're on to the subject matter, my hi-fi journey. It started when I was young, very young, and also impressionable. My male parental unit was always buying and selling bits of hi-fi. In fact, he was compulsive about it. For him, I don't think it was really about the music at all. But you may get a feel as to what exactly that means shortly. This was in the mid to late 80s and early 90s. We had music centres and receivers coming through the house. Kenwood, Panasonic, Akai, Sony, Pioneer, all second-hand and mostly already by then a decade or two old. Whenever he was short of beer money every couple of weeks, whatever hi-fi he had would disappear. Suffice to say that didn't really get to use much of it as I was growing up, and unfortunately, music wasn't really a big thing growing up. Of course, these are the days, that historic era pre-internet. So what you were exposed to at home was largely what you were exposed to. I did, however, have two older brothers. Strictly speaking, half brothers, but that's neither here nor there really. I remember my oldest brother moving into his own house in the mid 80s, and I was still very much knee high at that point. Well, no, probably a bit taller than that, but you get the general gist. I was still very young, certainly nowhere being near being a teenager. And I can remember him having these huge, is it Yamo? Anyway, these huge Jamo speakers with big bass woofers. The cabinets were absolutely huge, and they were so large that they were on casters, and I was always very impressed by them. But I never got to hear him play them at any sort of significant volume. I think usually out of concerns for the neighbours. I think that was probably reserved for when he knew the neighbours were out. Um, my youngest older brother, he lived at home till into his late 20s. He had the smallest bedroom in the house, and for those living in America or other such places, you might not appreciate how small a small English bedroom is, but we're talking a room that is large enough to put a bed in and perhaps a small wardrobe, and that's it. We quite often call them box rooms, but they are a feature of 60s and 70s, particularly 70s and onwards housing, I guess, where home builders, developers try and cram as many bedrooms into a property as they can, so they can sell it as a 4 or 5 bedroomed house. But in a lot of situations, that small room is very much a spare bedroom, let alone one that is occupied or even occupied by someone who had this much technology crammed inside it. And you have to bear in mind he wasn't only into hi-fi, he was also into amateur radio. He was also into PCs. Um, in the sort of mid to late 90s. I remember we were, because of that, one of the first households to get internet access. However, that's digressing. He had a hi-fi, as already mentioned. Initially, it comprised a NAD C3020 integrated amplifier, and that gave way to a trio pre and power amplifier combo, and that in turn gave way to a Pioneer integrated amp, which I think was quite a posh one. I don't remember the exact model number. He was especially proud of an NEC CD903 CD player, which carried an audiophile specification. Yeah, I'll talk more about that in a minute, but in 1986, it retailed for 280,000 yen, which I've determined to be about £1,000, and with inflation that'd be £3,000 today. It was 21 kilograms in weight. It had balanced outputs. Um, yeah, I mean this thing was astounding. I believe it had an R2R ladder resistor DAC inside it. I believe it had 14 discrete power supplies. It was quite a beast. And as I recall, it came with a remote control that was probably about the width of 3 or 4 modern remote controls. Um, Not quite as deep, but yeah, and it was called a commander, not a remote commander, not a remote control. So he was especially proud of that. He also had a Pioneer graphic equalizer. I think it was at least 10 bands. And I was mesmerized by the damn thing when he was playing music, to be honest, watching those little LEDs flicker up and down. Um, Speaker wise, he started with some Wharfdale Diamond bookshelf speakers, but that gave way to a Bose Acoustimas 5 system, which, for the uninitiated, that is sort of a bass module, a subwoofer. The idea of that being you can put it anywhere, and a pair of small twin cubed satellite speakers. And I spoke with him actually just prior to recording, and it turns out he still owns that Bose Acoustimas 5 or AM5 system today. I think it's in storage, but he's still got it nonetheless. So I was impressed for two reasons. One, it was loud. It went louder than any other hi-fi or music reproduction equipment I'd experienced. Um, I think some of the receivers I'd seen were quite loud, but the speakers were never actually up to very much in terms of handling that volume without distortion. And I think even as a young child, I could detect that distortion, and I didn't like it very much. Um, so that was one thing. I think the other was I couldn't believe how loud this system was with these tiny cube satellite speakers. It was um, it was almost like magic to me with my lack of understanding of physics at that tender young age. When he left home, I inherited his small room, but sadly not his hi-fi. In the late 90s, I saved up enough to buy myself my first, and this is in air quotes, hi-fi. I wouldn't call it hi-fi by my standards today, but at the time, I was very pleased with it. It was a Sony Mini system with an integral CD player, tuner, and this is a long time before digital radio or DAB or DAB Plus as we call it in the UK. It was simply an analog tuner with a digital display and digital tuning, probably phase lock loop tuning, I'm guessing. A mini disc player and a cassette deck. That was, I believe, a Sony CMT-CP500MD. That really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Um, yeah, I think that was actually launched in about 2002, maybe 2001. It was an all-in-one system with separate two-way speakers, and it put out 27 watts per channel RMS into 6 ohms. I think the supplied speakers being 6 ohms. I was perfectly happy with it at that time, and at least it was sized appropriately to that small bedroom, both in terms of its physical sort of size, but also in terms of how much power it produced, and the problems that small rooms can represent acoustically. Sorry, I am still suffering from hay fever, so I'm afraid there's still some heavy breathing on these recordings. I do have another microphone arriving, which I think might work better for me than the lavalier. Um, but yeah, my apologies for that. So this is around about the turn of the millennium. I had this hi-fi, and I kept it until I got my first house. Um, I don't think it got used very much, and I think it eventually got sold because it wasn't used at all, and what little space it took up was valuable space. And my ex-wife, well, I don't think she understood hobbies, let alone music. So yeah, it didn't happen. And I'd always kept that aspiration for having a decent hi-fi of my own, and I didn't actually achieve it until relatively recently. Um, I think I was 42, 43 by the time I took my first sort of leap. This was a few years, well, 2, 3 years after I switched to full-time work from home as a result of the COVID pandemic and the reaction to that. And my office space was again the smallest room in the house. Thankfully, slightly bigger, slightly larger than that old bedroom, um, but not much. It's about 2 meters by about 2.5 meters in size, so it's not huge. And that's worth bearing in mind for future. It was a very makeshift arrangement initially with my old wife's dressing table. Sorry, my old wife. My wife isn't. My current wife's old dressing table that she'd had back from her sort of teenage years. That was my makeshift desk. Um, and eventually, I took the bed out of that room and replaced it with a larger home built desk at a more appropriate height. and that made space to put a hi-fi in there, which this was an idea that eventually dawned on me. But I'm spending all this time working from home in this room, and I have full control over the environment. I have no colleagues to complain about me listening to music anymore. Why don't I take advantage of this and get some hi-fi? Now, I didn't want to start by spending lots of money on something I didn't know whether or not I'd derive much pleasure from. I wasn't sure about the value for money proposition, and I'm sure I thought along the lines of that many people would. I bought a second-hand hi-fi from eBay. In fact, I bought some components, an amplifier, a tuner, and a CD player for the princely sum of £125. They were a Yamaha AX300 amp, the matching Yamaha TX300 tuner, and if I recall correctly from the last time I mentioned this in episode 2, I think those were manufactured, well, they were manufactured in the early 80s, maybe somewhere between 82 and 84, I think. And a Yamaha CDX-730E CD player, which I think was a middle to upper range CD player, which I was pairing with an entry level, a very much entry level. In fact, you couldn't buy a cheaper amplifier in the Yamaha range. So that was that. I think looking back now, just a few years on from that first purchase, you can't actually even get the CD player in good working condition for £125. Well, you can just. I think that might require a little bit of patience. And that just shows, I think, that we are experiencing a little bit of a resurgence in old hi-fi still. Now. Yeah, that's kind of funny where second-hand hi-fi prices are going for equipment that, it has no real value. It wasn't particularly special in its day, but it appears to be a little bit more sought after now than it was back 2-3 years ago, which is interesting. Now, this is where I want to start to talk about the first mistake I made. A former colleague had not so sagely advised me against buying used speakers. So I was obviously discussing this at some point before this ever happened. I was possibly discussing the prospect of buying a second-hand hi-fi or second-hand components and speakers with someone who I knew had a bit of an interest in music and hi-fi. And that was his advice to me. He said, "You don't know how hard they've been driven, and thus you don't know how much they're distort and how knackered they are. Don't buy used speakers." That's was his advice, and I regrettably took that to heart. So with my tiny budget, I bought the cheapest speakers that were available from Richer Sounds at the time, and these were JBL Control 1 compact bookshelf speakers. They're often called monitors, and I think they are popular actually with people who are who are creatives at the budget end who need a pair of fairly accurate speakers. And I don't mean to disparage them too much because at the time they were fine. Um, they contributed to a hi-fi system that was much more detailed and resolving than I was used to. And bear in mind the benchmark here is pretty low. I'm talking about Bluetooth speakers and I'm talking about sound bars in reality. The crummy hi-fi stereo in the van that I own, which isn't it wasn't then up to snuff, and indeed in the latest incarnation um, is better, but not by much. Um, yeah, I could play my favourite CDs, and I was able to pick out details in them that I'd not heard before. And I was able to recognise lyrics that I had in the past struggled with. This system, it was for what it was, for what it cost, it was great, and it got lots of use. Anytime I wasn't on a call or a meeting via Slack or Zoom or whatever, I'd be listening to music, and it was nice to have that part of me reawakened. However, I should not have heeded that former colleague's advice. I think, in hindsight, what I should have done was bought some better and more fuller sounding speakers secondhand. Something like the Wharfdale Diamond 220s, which I think are a bit of a bargain if you find a set of them and you're just getting into hi-fi. I did get a pair. We had a kitchen hi-fi. Well, we still do have a kitchen hi-fi. I did get a pair anyway, and I think they were in the second iteration of kitchen hi-fi, and I thought they really were very good for what they were. In fact, I'd say excellent, um, both at their original price point and the price you can now pay for them. So, moving on, I think I was probably inspired somewhat by Matt's YouTube channel. I think most of my listeners will have heard of Tech and he waxes lyrical about all sorts of technology, but particularly he's got a soft spot for background music machines, anything that uses tape, so Fidelipack, 4 track, 8 track, um, and of course in there cassettes, and he waxes lyrical about how good cassettes can sound um, in one or two of his videos. So naturally, I was inspired by this, and it triggered some nostalgia in me. I can remember using cassettes to copy music from the radio or record from CDs to play in my car. Um, I mean, I seldomly record music to play in the car these days because I try and drive as little as possible. Um, but yeah, as driving is not great fun these days at all. The roads are far too congested. But that aside, um, I thought I'd have a go at making some mixtapes and maybe even buy some pre-recorded albums on cassette, which I do. I have done. I've got a small but growing collection, and I find it enjoyable, and I marvel. I mean, I bought a Yamaha KX580, which I still have, and I'm very happy with it. It sounds better than it has any right to, and it sounds better than any sort of cassette player I've ever owned historically. Yeah, so I actually I actually changed jobs at some point, and my new manager, it turns out, was very interested in hi-fi. In fact, his father used to work at Philips as an engineer and was involved with the design and production of Philips' first CD player. So that just shows you what a small world it is. But yeah, he spoke to me about his hi-fi and about his system at home. Obviously, he was living it within constraints of having a young family and lots of demands on his time and having to prioritize his space at home. So he had quite a compact and minimalist system, which he'd gone to great lengths to do the best he could with what he had available, whilst getting wife approval factor. And he was telling me how he had some Dali Oberon threes and how great they were, and how prior to that he had some monitor audio bookshelf speakers that didn't really do it for him in the same way. So in my spare time, as you do, I started doing some research and and by that I really mean reading reviews and watching YouTube videos. And eventually I caved in and ordered a set of as new Dali Oberon fives. I think they set me back about £600. I believe they've just been replaced by the Dali Sonic range. I think that's Sonic with a K at the end. Um, so there are some good discounted deals around on them on the whole Oberon range at the moment, if you're interested. Um, and At this point, there's another hard lesson to learn about hi-fi if you have a partner or spouse, and you need to discuss and get approval for large purchases. That's large purchases in terms of cost, but also in terms of the space that they take up, or perhaps in terms of the noise that they make. Obviously, when you share your home, um, your the people you share it with may be less enthusiastic about loud music. Yeah, I did consult my wife before purchasing them, but I didn't think she realised I was serious. So when she answered yes, she was either being humorous or sarcastic. Needless to say, when they arrived, she was not happy. At least, she was not happy initially. I have to say, she warmed to them, and actually, on a whim, as a result, she bought a Dali Catch with a K soundbar. It's a discontinued product, but you could still get them at the time. But she bought that so she could listen to music, as well as get better quality sound with the television that was in the master bedroom. She very much liked to take a lie in on a Sunday and listen to music. And I have to say that this soundbar is absolutely terrific musically. So yeah, she bought it on a whim, and that was after seeing me enjoy my music and enjoy hi-fi. So if you are in a situation where you're struggling to get spousal approval, well, it's not static. Things may change. You may just have to bear with things for a while. Yeah, let's move on from that. The Dali Oberon 5s, they are compact floor standing speakers. Um, I had measured carefully and I realised I could just squeeze them into that small office room in between the furniture that was along one wall, a chest of drawers and that dressing table, and the side walls. It wasn't ideal, but given the constraints, it was workable. The stands for mount speakers were all wider than the diminutive width of the Oberon 5s, which is really why I selected them over the Oberon 3s. I did look at buying sort of speaker stands, short speaker stands that could go on a piece of furniture just to give them some isolation, but this is what I arrived at. It wasn't ideal. And there is another glaring mistake here, and that is the compact floor standers were still too much speaker for the room. I think if the room had been a meter deeper, I would have got away with it, but in reality, it wasn't quite big enough for me to get the full benefit from these speakers. But even with that said, even with all that compromise, they sounded fantastic. Um, Relative to anything I heard before. In fact, these speakers were really, I think, the gateway drug, as it were. I think buying these speakers was a pivotal moment, and just hearing how much fuller they sounded, how much more dynamic they were, they were really joyful. They really got me to engage and connect with the music. And yeah, they were brilliant. Even if I felt like I needed to push my chair back through the opposing wall to get the best out of them, they still sounded absolutely superb to my ears at the time. And this absolutely buoyed my enthusiasm for hi-fi and music in general. I am concentrating on the gear a little bit today, and that's okay. We can do that. Well, it's my podcast. I'll talk about whatever I want to, and just hope that somebody out there takes something away from it. But yeah, this buoyed my enthusiasm, and it wasn't long before the next upgrade came. So bear in mind, I'm working from home day to day in my office and using the music to keep me sane a lot of the time. My wife was working downstairs, so this quite often meant listening to music at quite a low volume. And the Yamaha AX300 had a little niggle at low volumes. Its volume control pot was unbalanced at those low levels, so that would mean that one channel was louder than the other. And yes, it had tone controls and a balance control, so I could compensate for that with the balance control. But it drove me nuts. I'm not really OCD, but if I was, it would have been a trigger. And the fact that when I was able to listen louder and I turned it up, I had to reset the balance control. It did have an indent on it, so it was easy to do. But then I had to set it back and fine tune it so the channels were balanced for low volume listening again. It did my nut in. So that was all the excuse I needed, I think. I kept an eye on the second-hand market, and eventually this Rotel system came up. It comprised a Rotel RC03 and RB03 pre and power amps. So those were sort of a matched pair, but you could use the preamp and the power amp with any other pre or power amp. And it was completed with an RCD02 CD and HD CD, high definition CD player. Um, yeah, I mean, this is a system that I've not seen come up very often, to be honest. I think it sort of shares the same DNA as a legendary, is it the RA02 amplifier, which was very well revered by the hi-fi press when that came out. So I felt like I couldn't go wrong with this. Um, and I drove over to Derby to see it demonstrated, and the guy demonstrating it was actually showing it off with a pair of JBL Control Ones. So I know that it sounded better with them in his room than it did than my Yamaha AX300 did driving them. So I knew that this was something a little bit special. Um, I snapped it up for about £200 and carted it home as fast as I could. And yeah, as soon as I plugged it in, the difference was immediately evident. There was more body to the music, there was more pronounced bass and even better bass control. The mid range was richer, and the top end was, I would say, ever so slightly more nuanced and refined. I think I was in hi-fi heaven. But this is where I made my next mistake, and I believe this is, I'm not keeping count accurately, but I think this is hi-fi mistake number 3. After a while, I noticed a noise coming through the speakers. It sounded a bit like static you'd get on an old TV or radio set when you were slightly off frequency. It was subtle, but I could hear it at low volumes, and at high volumes with no music playing, it was quite pronounced. Yes, annoying it certainly was. I tried to resolve this in all the usual ways. I swapped cables around. I took the preamp out. I tried the preamp separately. But there was no quieting it. It was definitely manifesting itself, particularly in the amplifier. I tried it plugged into another electrical outlet in another part of the house. It was still present. And I just got it into my head at this point that this piece of equipment was broken for some reason. And I sold those Rotel components on with the amp marked as spares or repairs. Now, whomever bought those, they got a very good deal because it turns out there was nothing wrong with the amplifier. Um, I replaced them. I mean, this was an expenditure I hadn't planned for. So I replaced them with a Cambridge Audio AXR 100D, which is a DAB receiver, and I re-employed the Yamaha CD 730 CD player, which I still had. Well, I hadn't. I hadn't sold that on, so that was rather a stroke of good luck. In fact, I was reluctant to sell that on because of it was so reminiscent of my brother's hi-fi equipment, and I felt a little bit attached to it, so I still had that. Yeah, this was a real step back in terms of sound quality. The receiver was competent and had a great deal of connectivity with plenty of inputs, an onboard DAC. It even had a recording output and a subwoofer output. And it sounded okay. I mean, the bass and lower mids, they lacked some punch compared to the Rotel. But really, the Rotel and this Cambridge Audio receiver, they were in different leagues. Um, I think the Rotel pre and power amp was probably much more money new. Um, I mean, it was some years old when I bought it, relative to this very nearly new Cambridge Audio receiver. Um, and I think you're probably talking about a piece of equipment that probably cost twice as much compared to what I replaced it with. Anyway, worse than that, the fault still manifested. It wasn't the Rotel at all. It was something amiss with the electricity supply. I'm guessing some RF interference, possibly, or some DC current. I'm not sure. But the solution proved to be, and this was at the suggestion of another friend who was also into hi-fi. He suggested I get it's a Takima CS947, and it's called in air quotes a mains conditioner. Um, it's not really a mains conditioner. You don't get mains power reconditioned without effectively regenerating it, but it is a filter, and it filtered the mains very effectively. The noise had gone away, which was all I wanted, and I wish I'd have discovered that before selling on that Rotel equipment. I really do. But that said, if I had, I guess that might have been it. I think I may have been content at that point and probably not progressed any further down the line. And I'm glad I did because we made, as I'm about to tell you, we make several further advances as we go with the rest of this hi-fi story. If you're still listening, thank you, by the way. I suspect a large number of people that began listening to this have probably switched off by now, but hey, you can't please everybody, and in terms of audience, well, it is quality, not quantity, right? Um, so I'd made my bed, and I had to lie in it. I held on to the Cambridge Audio AXR 100D for quite some time. I augmented it with an SVS SB1000 Pro subwoofer, which I think integrated quite well with the DALI Oberon 5s. It's quite customizable in terms of not only its frequency, its filtering, but also the filter slope, of course the phase, and one of the greatest things about this subwoofer actually is it has got some form of parametric EQ. So if you're getting a bit of boom in a small room, you can tame it, and it works wonderfully in that respect. So that was a great purchase. In fact, I think this subwoofer has made one of the biggest differences to my listening experience, and its contribution may be subtle, at least in the terms of the way I have it set up, but it is notable. I didn't buy it to get thumping bass. I bought it partially to make up for this shortfall, that this what I felt was missing from what the AXL 100D delivered. But also, the Oberon 5s, they were rolled off below 38 hertz, and I listened to a lot of music that has got bass guitar in it. I was curious about organ music, I believe even the sort of lowest register on a piano may fall below 38 hertz. Um, and I really wanted to hear the fundamentals from those low notes. Um, the, I mean, the human mind is a wonderful thing in the way that it processes audio because quite often when we hear the fundamental frequencies of those bass notes, our mind fills in the blanks for us. I think, as I've alluded to before, I think it's a bit like watching a black and white television. If you watch it for long enough, eventually you just perceive it as colour. Your mind puts the colour in for you, and it's an incredibly powerful thing. And when people talk about psychoacoustics, you really can't be um, dismissive because it's absolutely true. Your mind does fill the blanks in for you. But even so, I did want to hear those fundamentals. I wanted to know what difference that would make. Um, and I got much more than that. I think the biggest contribution the sub makes actually comes at low volume listening. Um, Below that threshold at which our ears become more sensitive to bass. Um, the yeah, the sub made that sort of listening feel a lot more engaging and a lot more rewarding. Um, I also found with the sub engaged that the upper mids and treble sound more defined in music, which is tiered. It's there's bass recorded, there's um, uh, lower mids recorded. I think having the subwoofer there, just giving a little bit of an extra oomph, really helps make the top end sound a lot more defined. And I've heard other people say this as well, so I don't think it's just me. Um, yeah, I think the sub in a small room has been a real great addition to my system, and I still have that subwoofer. Um, and I think I will have that for a long time. So yeah, the system sat as it was for a little while, and I started to get turntable curious. Now I swore when I first bought it I wouldn't go down that road. I was going to keep it simple. I was just going to stick mainly to CDs. This is just a little it's a little sort of side project. I'm not going to let it get out of hand. Vinyl is very expensive, and yeah, I didn't want to get into that when I first started, but eventually, I think we're about 18 months, 2 years in now, and I'm getting vinyl curious. So I bought a turntable. I mean, I probably really shouldn't have at this point. I should have done something about that amplifier, but nevertheless, it is what I did. And unfortunately, I once again let constraints get the better of me. So this is really mistake number 4. I opted for a turntable which was made by Denon, and it was called the DP 300F. Why? Well, it looked like a good value proposition. I think it was about £300 new. And yeah, the other reason, it was automatic. Okay, you might think I'm insane, but there was a good reason for this. By this time, I had a four shelf HiFi rack, which was on top of a chest of drawers. The top shelf was almost head height, and that would have been the shelf where the turntable lived. I knew that trying to queue up a stylus with the turntable at that height would probably end up in a disaster. So I thought a fully automatic turntable would resolve that problem, and it did, to be fair. I bought my first vinyl records, Adele's 30 and a repress of Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, and I was underwhelmed. Where was the bass? The sound was very thin, anemic even. Also, when I played The Chain from Fleetwood Mac's Rumours LP, after the drop, something clearly was not right. That was my first experience of inner groove distortion. I replaced the included stylus with an Audio-Technica 80 VM95ml. That's the microlinear stylus. I figured looking at the VM95 range, that was probably the best bang for the buck. And the result was still light on bass. And we learned later that that's not down to the cartridge, by the way, for anyone considering buying a turntable with or buying that particular cartridge or stylus as an upgrade to an existing VM95 cartridge. But sure enough, it was good enough to make that inner groove distortion go away, which was a small blessing. The turntable was followed by a minidisc deck. Tech Moan reminded me about my enjoyment of minidisc back in the early noughties, and the thoughts of recording LPs to minidisc and making my own mixes occurred to me, of course. I bought an absolutely immaculate Sony MDS JE480 minidisc deck. I treated it to a new eject belt and some lubrication, and then it worked perfectly. And I really enjoyed the format. In fact, with the A-Track S encoding, when I recorded CDs, the minidisc copy was every bit as good as the original. I couldn't tell that anything was missing, and closing my eyes and trying to forget what I was listening to, whether it was CD or minidisc, I could not tell the difference, at least not on the system that I had at the time. It would be an interesting sort of comparison to do now. And I unfortunately and regrettably sold that minidisc deck about 18 months later for about twice what I paid for it. And now the prices have tripled, at least for the decks that are in that immaculate condition. At the time, I figured I wasn't actually using the deck as much as I thought I would, and I thought it'd be a good idea to start rationalising my hi-fi a little bit. Not only in terms of space, with the number of shelves I had on my hi-fi rack, but also in terms of where I was putting the money. Um, I thought it better to have a small number of very good sources instead of lots of mediocre ones, or perhaps a better amplifier. By this point, we are many upgrades in, and we still have some way to go. I purchased a Riga DAC, which was a piece of equipment a good friend was selling at quite a good price. I'm still indebted to him, really. And I started using that with the Yamaha CDX 730E, but it also meant that I could start using a laptop PC as a streamer to feed the DAC via its USB input. And before long, I sold the Yamaha CD player and bought a Cambridge Audio CXC Series 2 CD transport. I suppose I was going for the aesthetic as it visually matched the AXR 100D, even though the AXR 100D was perhaps not that impressive in terms of sound quality. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was good, it was alright, but it just wasn't as impressive as the Rotel I'd had before. And I eventually supplemented that with a Cambridge Audio CXN 100, which is a combined streamer and DAC, and that I still own, and I'm still very happy with. I use the Cambridge Audio CD transport interchangeably with the DAC section of the CXN 100 and also with the Riga DAC. The difference between them was, of course, not night and day, but the Riga DAC certainly had a slightly punchier sound, particularly at the lower frequencies, spanning up to that lower mid-range. It was quite difficult to tell them apart. Aside from that, I think I think the top end of the CXN 100 with it, I believe it's got an ESS Saber DAC inside. I think that can be a little bit more pronounced at times, maybe occasionally a little bit over pronounced, but I really am splitting hairs. Um, I marginally prefer the Riga DAC, but it is so marginal that I would be perfectly happy with either. And yeah, I think by this time I thought it was actually now about time to do something about the AXR 100D that I wasn't quite happy with because the Rotel system that came before had spoiled me. Um, it wasn't really something that I planned. I think I just noticed that, oh, I've got enough money lying around to do something about this, and yeah, well, why not? So I bought a second-hand Riga LXR. I hadn't heard one. I didn't really know what to expect. I'd read lots of good things. I'd read enough online to understand that there was a bit of a Riga fan club, and I think if you were particularly skeptical, you could call it a cult. But I figured I'm buying it at a second-hand price. I've got nothing to lose so long as it works, and it was magnificent. It yeah, there were three main reasons I was attracted to it. One was a good number of inputs. The second was that it had a good old-fashioned tape loop, and something missing from that is something missing from many modern amplifiers. And yeah, there was also the reputation that the brand had. They seemed simple, no nonsense, with a functional approach to hi-fi. The LXR delivered the heft that was missing from the AXR 100D. It could not, however, compensate for the deficit in the sound quality from the turntable. I was hoping that the lackluster performance from my turntable could have been attributed to the phono stage in the AX100D, but that alas turned out not to be the case. I didn't actually hold on to that LXR for very long. A keenly priced Illicit R cropped up, so I snapped that up as well, and I did a bit of sort of side-by-side comparison of the two. And I decided that the Illicit R was a bit more neutral, but the real big win for me was the volume control. Instead of being a simple pot, it was a stepped resistor ladder design with LED indicators. And that let me determine the maximum volume setting I could use for daytime listening, at least within reason, because input sources do vary a little bit, but within reason, without the music being so loud as to annoy my wife when she was working downstairs. Um, it also had a direct input and a record link output, which also offer a bit more flexibility, to which I do use to some degree. Just bear with me. Sorry, the hay fever gets the better of me every now and then, necessitating a little pause in the recording. Yeah, so I kept the two for a while, and eventually the Elicitar won me over. And this is at the point in time where things started getting a little bit more serious, and I felt it was time to address some of the compromises I had made. One of those was the positioning of the speakers. If you recall, they're in the room right against the edge walls, and I'm going to call this mistake number 5. I should have bitten the bullet sooner and rearranged my space with hi-fi in mind. It turns out I really was stifling the sound quality and particularly the stereo imaging with the arrangement that I had. I emptied out the room in its entirety. I replaced the desk with one I could actually fit drawers underneath. I replaced the 2 pieces of furniture between the 2 speakers with a narrow tall boy. And I made space to have the hi-fi rack alongside my listening position on the floor instead of having it sat up on another unit. And now not only does the room look a lot better, but it meant I could position the speakers away from the sidewalls instead of right next to them. And also position the subwoofer in a better place so it wasn't effectively side firing. This improved the stereo imaging hugely and it made the sound a bit less smeary, I'm going to say. My wife doesn't like the use of the word smeary. I believe it has certain it has certain meanings in other contexts which are, yeah, let's shall we say less appetizing. So we won't go any further down that path. Yeah, and then the upgrades continued. I was offered some Wilson Benesh ARC speakers from a friend, the friend I bought the DAC from, at really a very good price. I deliberated for a while. Um, I did a bit of research into them, and I saw the recommended retail price for these speakers. It was about £3,500. Um, I couldn't really. I mean, I found a couple of reviews for them, but they're not a very common speaker, let's say. So there's not a huge consensus about them, positive or negative, either way, to be honest. And Wilson Benesh struck me as very much a boutique brand, and I guess at some level I just didn't want to be this guy that bought boutique hi-fi. That was a bit much for me, I think. But in the end, I did buy them. I figured at any rate they would be a better fit for the room, and yeah, indeed they were. Um, I didn't actually find them to be that different in terms of overall sound quality relative to the Dali Oberon 5s, which I think is a testament to how good the Oberon 5s are. Um, yes, the Oberon 5s paired with the Elicitar were actually a touch too bright, and I'd rectified that by toning them out a little bit. Um, this, however, was not an issue with the ARCs. They don't seem too bright at all with the Elicitar. I mean, the Elicitar does have a reputation for being a bit bright when paired with certain speakers. It is an amp that needs some care in terms of what you pair it with. Um, that I mean, my experience supports that. That comes very much, from people who have had the Elicitar and shared their opinions online, of course. Um, yeah, the Arcs, they held on to a lot of the positive traits of the Oberon 5s with absolutely fantastic dynamics, good transients, very well composed and tight bass. The distinct positive improvement again was the soundstage. It felt much sharper in terms of the positioning of instruments relative to the Dallies. Now, some of that would have been the Dallies being too big for the space that they occupied, but it is also a characteristic that the ARCs are noted for, and that's commensurate with my experience. Yeah, I think I will be owning those for a long time. I think it's going to be a long time before I can justify buying a stand mount speaker that is going to be any significantly better than these uh, ARC speakers. And I certainly won't be able to buy any of their successors because Wilson Benesh have gone incredibly upmarket, and yeah, I mean, I think I don't know, but I think you're talking five figures for the current equivalent in their range. Although I do believe it does have, are they 2.5 way or 3 way with a sort of downfiring um, isobaric woofer to deliver extra bass. I'm certainly very interested in them. They are a novel concept to me, but I think they are just going to have to remain some sort of pipe dream. Um, yeah, I want to talk a little bit here about buying second-hand equipment. If you are on a budget, second-hand equipment is a great option, which should not be dismissed. As I've already touched on, the biggest advantage is that you can buy gear and sell it on for the same or not much less than you originally paid for it, depending on how new it is. I mean, if you're buying brand new gear and newly released hi-fi, and it's not been in the marketplace very long, and then you sell it, you might be able to command slightly more for it than you would if it's been readily available for a while and there are lots already in circulation on the second-hand market. So within reason. Um, and the great thing about that, if you're not able to drive to a dealer and take advantage of their listing room to demo stuff or demo kit equipment at home, you can buy second-hand gear and you can try it out. And if you don't like it, you can often move it on without losing too much money. The only circumstance in which you would lose money significantly is either the seller is not genuine and has ripped you off in some way, or you've paid over the odds for it. It's always important to do your research. I find looking at sold items on eBay to be a good indication as to what things are actually worth, especially when you look at the auctions, um, things that have sold at auction as opposed to selling with a buy it now price. But yeah, there is always this other concern that what if the piece of equipment you buy doesn't work or stops working? There are a number of hi-fi dealers that sell stock on eBay, and they will quite often offer a 3-month warranty, which I have in one situation had to take advantage of, and I have to say I came out of it rather well. I absolutely would do that again. Okay, pause for breath. So back to that turntable, the Denon DP300F, which yeah, I was getting tired of it, to be honest. It wasn't encouraging me to listen to the small collection of vinyl I had amassed. It certainly wasn't enthusing me about buying any more vinyl. So I decided it was time to move that on. I treated myself to a Technics SL-100C direct drive turntable, um, and I slotted the Audio Technica 8095 ml stylus onto the 8095C, I think it is, cartridge it came with. I could, I didn't even have to change the cartridge. I could just simply swap the styluses over. And yeah, overnight my vinyl listening was absolutely transformed. Finally, I had a turntable that could compete with and was perhaps even better than some of the other sources in my system. That Technics turntable was a revelation and a lesson in choosing the compromises you make very carefully. One of those compromises, of course, being cost. I think, in my very limited experience, I think that Technics SL-100C sets the benchmarks in terms of a still affordable but very, very competent turntable. And I would wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone. I know Project do some cheaper turntables, but I have to say I've never heard any of them. I suspect from what people say about them, they would certainly be a better proposition than the Denon DP300F. Um, sorry, Denon, I don't mean to be so disparaging. Um, yeah, so I'm just getting lost in my notes here. Um, we are, as I said, I think this is up to late 2025. Um, and yeah, the friend that had sold me the Riga DAC and the Wilson Benesch ARC speakers, you can tell I'm buying his hi-fi bit by bit. Um, he had all along been suggesting that I should pick up a Riga Planar 8. He'd had one and he absolutely loved it, so obviously he was quite evangelical about it. I was not going to make that leap yet, but I was thinking about it. I knew that I needed to make some space for it, and well, really the power supply, the I think the Riga turntables from the um, Planar 3 RS and up, they come with a discrete power supply, which is like a half-width hi-fi component. Um, yeah, if you're going to get one of those turntables, obviously you need space to accommodate that power supply. So he um, he offered me here a Quadraspire Q4 hi-fi rack, which I think had 6 shelves. So I picked that up. Um, Obviously I bought it off him. I mean, these racks are quite or hi-fi stands, if you want to use their terminology. They're quite expensive, expensive new. Um, so I picked that up, and I managed to pick up another cheap shelf so that I could extend it and make it 7 shelves. I got it in the wrong colour, so so I actually sanded it down and repainted it black, matte black, and it matches actually fairly well with what I've got. And as it's a bottom shelf, you can't really see that it's got a slightly different texture. It works quite well, so that's my budget hi-fi rack. Um, yeah, I think, but I was still mindful I needed to make a bit more space because I thought I wanted to have the option of not only adding this this power supply for this Riga Planar 8, I wanted also to have the space for a discrete phono stage at some point, if that opportunity ever arose. So I bought a second-hand Riga Saturn R in I can only describe as in what I can only describe as cosmetically brilliant condition. Unfortunately, it was really struggling to read CDs. I had fortunately though bought it from a hi-fi dealer, as I'd already sort of alluded to, via eBay, and they sent it back to Riga for repair. In fact, all I had to do was box it back up, print a label, and wait for it to be collected. And 2 weeks later, it arrived back, fully serviced, with a new laser pickup and in full working order. Did it sound any different to the Cambridge Audio CXC V2 CD transport, which was connected to the Riga DAC? No, not really. It actually sounds exactly the same, which is to say, very, very good. But having the CD transport and DAC as one unit kind of saved me half a rack shelf, and that was important because that gave me space for the Riga Planar 8's PSU. And aesthetically, the Saturn R really does look the part next to the Elicitar. That's a nice piece of hi-fi component matchy matchy, which you know gives me great pride every time I see it. And of course, in this time, the Elicitar developed this fault. So, as I've already discussed in prior episodes, that went off to Riga to be repaired via Cheshire Audio, and Riga fixed it free of charge. Um, I felt almost compelled at this point, though, to buy that Riga Planar 8. Riga had been so good to me indirectly with the Saturn R, and again indirectly with the Elicitar, but more directly, they fixed it completely free of charge. This is a company I was really liking, and I was liking the sound signature of their products that I had experience of. Um, I went for it. I bought that Planar 8 and made use of that extra shelf and space. Well, to some degree, I still actually have a free shelf ready for that phono stage if and when that happens. Um, and yeah, much like the Dali Oberon 5s in comparison to the Wilson Benesch ARCs, the more expensive speakers having stiff competition from the Dalis. It was a very similar case with the Planar 8 with the ND7 cartridge versus the Technics SL100C and the Audio Technica AT VM95 ML cartridge. Um, there is some difference between the two turntable and cartridge combinations, but it is subtle and nuanced in most respects. And it is still very early days for the Plane R8. Um, and again, this is, not that the Plane R8 isn't good enough. I think it's a testament to just how good that Technics SL100C is. Um, the Plane R8 undoubtedly digs up some more detail. I think it is incredibly transparent, and it is definitely less forgiving of poor recordings, of poor quality pressings. I think the same is also true of poor recordings, to be honest. Um, the Plane R8 has been absolutely fantastic so far. Is it a world of difference to the Technics SL100C? No, it isn't. As I said, it is subtle and nuanced, but it is there. It is definitely there, and it is unmistakable, those differences. I don't think they're going to make a huge difference to your average listener, but I think for those that want to get the absolute most out of their vinyl, and they do want to hear every little detail in a recording, I think the Plane R8 is probably where it's at in terms of the all important price to performance ratio. Um, I think at least for the likes of me, I think the Riga 10, Riga Plane R10, or the Riga Naiad, they may as well be unobtainium. Particularly if you add moving coil cartridge, which with a turntable like that is really, I think, what you want to do. Um, so I think the Plane R8 is also like the Wilson Benesch ARC, like the SVS SB 1000 Pro subwoofer. That's going to be with me for a long time. I think, having said that, I think the Illicit R and the Saturn R are going to be with me for a long time. I don't see myself changing any of those components in the near future. That more or less brings us up to where things sit currently. So, in summary, my main system consists of the Wilson Benesch ARC speakers, the Riga Illicit R amplifier, the SVS SB1000 Pro sub, and in terms of sources, we've got the Riga Plane R8 with the ND7 cartridge, the Riga Saturn R, the Cambridge Audio CXN 100 streamer, the Tangent Tuner 2 DAB and FM tuner, and the Yamaha KX 580 cassette deck. With that combination, I derive an awful lot of pleasure from it, an awful lot of contentment. I'm absolutely delighted with the way it sounds still, and I get a connection with the music like I've never had before. I don't really see the reason to have to spend any more. Emphasis on the word have. I'm not saying I won't, I probably will, but I don't see the need to spend any more money. It is absolutely fantastic performing system to my ears, and it also largely looks great to my eyes as well. There are some things I would like to do. I would like to try a moving coil cartridge and a discrete phono stage at some point during in the future. There's absolutely no rush, no drastic hurry or urgency. I don't feel like I'm missing out by not having those things, but it is something I'm definitely curious about. I'd like to bring back the mini disc deck, even if it was a bit of a novelty. It was a novelty that I enjoyed, and yeah, I'm missing it more than I thought I would. The third and final thing in terms of hi-fi components, I would really like a nice high-end cassette deck. I think a three-head cassette deck which can offer the full frequency range. Um, I think just a step up from what I've got would be dual capstans. I think that would just give me a little extra confidence that whatever tape in it that I put in it, even if it is a little bit old and liable to snap or get chewed up. I think maybe that's a bit less likely to happen in a dual capstan cassette deck. Um, but yeah, my next real priority actually is not the hi-fi itself. It's going to be about improving the room acoustics. I'm looking at adding some sound absorbing panels to reduce the sound reflections in the room. I don't need any room EQ measurement software to tell me that my listening space is a bit of a wet room. Um, Even my non-audiophile ears are plenty good enough to tell me that. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't use that room for podcast recordings because there's too much echo, too much reverb. Um, it's at the low volume listening, which I do most of the time, and it's not only low volume listening; it's near field listening. The room interactions actually aren't such a big deal, but on those occasions when I can listen louder, the room acoustics do come into play. And yeah, not yet making any acoustic treatment to my room is what I'm going to call mistake number 6. It is actually relatively expensive compared to the cost of a system if you do it yourself. Um, you can do it yourself rather scientifically if you want to as well. There is some software out there called REQ or Room EQ, and you can use that with a measurement microphone. There are lots of videos on YouTube on how to do this, and there are recommendations for measurement microphones as well. Um, yeah, it looks like a good thing to do. I'm not going to get stuck into that yet because, as I said, I already know that I have a wet room. Um, and to a degree, it is. I know it is never going to be perfect. That space is used for other things. It is primarily my office. If it was an ideal listening space, there's things in there that I would get rid of. I'm not in a position to do that because I have to live with that space and make use of that space. Um, but I'm not going to obsess, I think, too much about it. I think I'm just going to try and address what my ears can hear at this point. A bit further down the line, I think when I've got the first few panels in, I may start to take some measurements and see where we're at and bring a bit more education into the mix. But until that point, we'll see. We'll see. Right, I think that's it. If you are still listening to the very end, I thank you. Um, it is appreciated. I will just add, I would love to hear your opinions on anything I've discussed today. If you've got any opinions about the speakers, particularly, with the Wilson Benesch ARC speakers not being so readily available secondhand, I mean, they do come up now and again, but that's going to require some patience. Are there any alternatives that you'd recommend to people who were perhaps in the position I was in when I bought them? Yeah, the contact details, I mentioned them at the start of the show, but I'll bring them up again briefly. It's hifi-hole at biscuit.ninja, or you can contact me via Blue Sky, hifi-hole.bsky.social. I would love, again, to hear from you. In the meantime, I'll be doing my best to enjoy the music, and I hope you do too. Bye for now.